Today is Thursday, June 2nd, and welcome to the 8:30 show. We are about to get it popping. Hello, and welcome to the 8:30 show. I'm KJ, and every Thursday night you'll find me here at 8:30 p.m. on YouTube at Metro Conservative Media. Please hit the subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. At the same time, I'm also live on Facebook at Metro Conservative Media's Facebook page. We want our content to reach a broader audience and recognized all over Maryland, and for that matter, the country. The only way that happens is if you subscribe. So drop a like right now and comment. You can do that on YouTube and Facebook. Also, you can join the conversation. We will respond to your comments during the show. This show is a platform where I chat with various individuals about important issues that directly impact our communities. Tonight, my guest is Ethan Reese. He is a writer and has contributed to such outlets as Fox's OutKick, PJ Media, Rare Politics, and American Songwriter Magazine, as well as being named a writing fellow at the America's Future Foundation. How are you tonight, Ethan?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Good. Glad to have you on tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. All right, so we're going to get right into it. So generally, I start each show with a random question and answer segment so the audience can get to know you better in a fun and cool way. Sure. It's a rapid fire round of questions, and you answer as quickly as you can with the first thing that comes to your mind. Okay?
I think I can do that.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. All right, so what are you most known for amongst your friends?
I am most known for amongst my friends being the one that refuses to eat anything with condiments on it. I don't like ketchup or mayonnaise or mustard or anything that's considered gloopy.
Okay.
So anything that's like not a solid or a liquid, I generally won't eat. I think that's what I'm probably most well known for. Unfortunately, okay. You could say.
All right. Are you extroverted or introverted?
Would probably say I lean more introverted, but can be extroverted when the circumstances call for it.
Okay. What quality do you value most in your friends?
Let's say loyalty and consistency. I've got like a pretty solid group of friends that I've been friends with for a while now, and we're all pretty tight. So I think that over time, now getting into my 30s, you kind of really appreciate the long-term consistency there with the friend group.
Nice. Okay. In 3 words or less, what is the number one issue facing Baltimore today?
Ooh, that's tough. I would say violent crime and population loss.
Okay. Yeah.
4 words.
Right. Yeah, I get it. Homeschool or public school?
Oh, that's a tough one. I admittedly went to Christian school for most of my upbringing as a child. I have a 3 and a 1-year-old, so that decision is going to be coming up before too long. Right. I'd like to say homeschool, but there are just some practical limitations and logistical challenges there. So would say hopeful for homeschool.
Okay. All right. And if you could meet anyone, past or present, who would it be?
I would say Rocky Balboa, right after Rocky 3.
Fictional okay. Oh, cool. Okay. Crime, yeah. And last question. Biggest misconception about cisgender white males?
Oh, goodness. It's a mouthful, right? How about that we are, speaking for all, unable to be empathetic?
Okay. All right. Perfect. So thank you so much. So that wasn't too bad, right?
We got through it.
Yeah. All right. So I want to start off with kind kind of piggybacking off of that last question.
Mhm.
How is it so? Because we hear this a lot in media, in the mainstream media, especially this idea about cisgendered white males. And
Mhm. Mhm.
so, how is it being a white male in the U.S. these days? Because you guys have come under fire, especially by the
Sure.
left. So, I want to get your perception on that.
Well, I would say I've been kind of granted a little bit of a reprieve from that standpoint. I do think being in corporate America as a cisgender white male might present its challenges, but I'm kind of I work for a company out of Nashville that's in publishing and has even owned conservative properties, and I work from home,
Mhm.
generally as an individual contributor. So I'm kind of insulated from a lot of the politicking that would go on in your average corporation. So kind of immune from or insulated from a lot of that, luckily here.
Mhm.
Um, but that's a tough one. I mean, I definitely think there's a presumption, a little bit of a bad rap there. But
Yeah.
just have to navigate it as best you can and just kind of maintain that it's the individual that matters more than the collective.
Perfect. Yeah. And I asked that, and sort of like from a personal experience I had. I was at work. This was before the pandemic, and we were kind of in like a I forget what we were about to have a meeting, and we were just, I can't even remember what we were talking about, but it wasn't anything political, anything like that.
Mhm.
And it was myself and two other individuals. One was a white guy, and one was a white girl.
Mhm.
And and we were, I can't even remember what we were talking about, but we were all giving our opinion on it. And
Mm.
she just goes off on him and was just like, oh, this is something a cisgender male, white male would answer. And he
Mm.
was like, what are
Oh
you
no.
talking about? And so, but we see this kind of these remarks a lot more in media and in pop culture and even
Mhm.
in everyday. I want to run some of these quotes down by you and get your response on this. So,
Sure.
um, MSNBC's Joy Reid tweeted
Mhm.
earlier this year that conservatives would all love to openly say the N word and felt oppressed because they couldn't be openly racist. Um, we have Don Lemon, who, during a segment about the supermarket shooting in Kentucky, he says the biggest terror threat in this country is white men.
Mhm.
Again, on CNN, we have here, they had a headline in November of last year, and it read, "There's nothing more frightening in America today than an angry white man."
Hmm.
Um, and then lastly, we have on The View, co-host Sunny Holston said she dreads Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter,
Mm.
claiming it would benefit predominantly straight white men.
Mm.
Uh, so I want to, what is your response or take on this as far as we seeing this throughout mainstream media? Where do you
Mhm.
think it's coming from? And then how do you feel about these comments?
It's definitely discouraging. I think with regard to the second comment about, what's the number one threat to, civility in America, I think that we're finding out pretty clearly here with what's happened in the last few weeks that it's mental health issues. I mean, of course, guns are obviously a part of that, right? They're the kind of the weapon that's used by those with the mental health problems. But I think we're seeing a pretty clear pattern with regard to those that are committing these truly heinous crimes, whether it be, a white individual in Buffalo that's harboring some kind of racial animosity, or someone in Waukesha that's kind of the opposite of that case, or the person even in today in Tulsa. I think the thing that we're finding is that it's really people that are insulated, they're kind of separate from society. They're loners. They don't really have a, strong connective tissue with regard to their family, with their friends, their community. They're kind of sucked into these online worlds where you can kind of go down rabbit holes and kind of radicalize yourself if you're not careful. And I think it's that. I think that mental health is the problem more than anything, and a lack of a community structure. And I don't think that is specific to any one race, demographic, age group, region, state. I think that's generally universal, and it's a problem throughout the country, as well as here in Maryland and even Baltimore City, of course, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And as I mentioned at the top of the hour, the show pretty much concentrates on when I ask people about their conservative journey. So you are conservative, is that right?
I certainly am. Always have been. I'm not the type that I know it's like kind of there's like the Dave Rubins of the world that have like this big dramatic, like, a climactic story about how they were on the left and they came to the right. My mom has always been a really strong conservative, and so she kind of instilled those values in me from a very early age. And I have to give her credit. She was kind of ahead of the curve on a lot of these things. She was suspicious of public schooling from when we were a very young age. So I'm 31 now. So this was, 20, 25 years ago. And we didn't necessarily come from means in any kind of impressive way, but she was diligent in keeping her children out of public school. So we went to Christian school, we were homeschooled for a little while, and that was just kind of our upbringing. So I've really always been a conservative. I think I have had a little bit of a progression here in the last 10 years or so. I used to be, especially in college, like, very much of a libertarian, like, exclusively focusing on the individual. The individual should be able to pursue their own happiness, at any cost. Like, that's kind of the single most important thing for a flourishing society. And I think that what I'm finding now is, and this is, generally led by the philosophy of the Daily Wire guys. I think you guys are a fan of them as well, but I think you have to have, strong values. I think it's more important to have strong values that are reinforced by the culture, if not, mandated by the government, but certainly reinforced by the cultural institutions, whether that be, media, family, church, schools, whatever that might be. I think I'm finding now, especially having kids, that, a completely laissez-faire society might not be the best route. I think you've got to have, strong values.
Yeah. Yeah, and we often, like, behind the scenes here at Metro Conservative Media, because we have a range of conservative perspectives, and we do have some that are, lean more libertarian, and we're starting to see how the laissez-faire kind of thinking, as you mentioned, I think kind of leads us to where we are now. Especially when you come from a Christian perspective. Can you talk about that? How has your faith influenced your conservatism?
So I would honestly disclose to you that I've always really been quite the atheist, and I would still consider myself that today, although I'm increasingly sympathetic to the Christian point of view on society, generally speaking. I do think there has to be some kind of set of guiding principles that are outside of this sort of, woke mentality that's really kind of taken over the mainstream here. I think the best and really only alternative would be a set of Christian values, even though I personally am still a little bit skeptical of that. But again, back to the Daily Wire guys and a lot of the conservative thought leaders in the country, right now, I'm increasingly looking inward to think to myself, like, should I maybe reassess my faith or lack thereof? And even having children now, again, with the kids thing, with a 3 and a 1 year old, my son's starting to ask like those really deep questions, like, why this, why that? And, I find myself just resorting to the God answer. It's easy. There's that, of course, right? But, I think it's important to give children and adults for that matter, some kind of, a frame of mind, a reference point. And even if atheism works for me, I could definitely, I do certainly see the value in a Christian upbringing, more broadly. And again, even for myself, that's something that I'm kind of reflecting on the older I get. Like, I'm kind of looking inward and saying to myself, is being an atheist really where I'm at? And is that where I should be at 5 years from now and 10 years from now? I used to be really passionate about it. And it was kind of like along that libertarian strand of thought, the Ayn Rand school of the individual. And it's only about the individual and their accomplishments. And I'm moving away from that. So I'm not there yet, but give me 6 months or 12 months or a few years, and maybe we'll come back and have another conversation, and I'll be, a church-going Christian with my kids as well.
Okay. And so I want to go into a lot of your writing, so your pieces that you've written. One, you talk about some of the policies within Baltimore City. And so recently, the mayor was asked by the media, do you think your administration can have a summer of peace given what we've seen this year? And so Mayor Scott kind of fired back and said, ultimately, we ultimately have to understand personal responsibility. Where there's personal responsibility, when are we also going to call on people to check on what's going on with their young people to make sure they know what their young people are into? He also went on to say, when are we going to have a conversation how everybody, including your station, I think he was talking about WBF Fox 45, can play a part in reducing violence instead of spreading this hate, spreading this violence, spreading the hashtag, spreading this nonsense. So I want to get your response to that, because you've written about the reimagined policies within the city. What do you think about his response?
I think he's halfway there. I think the beginning part of that statement I would generally agree with. It is about the individual and the personal responsibility and kind of like parents checking in on their kids and knowing where they are. I think we're seeing with a lot of these crimes in Baltimore City, the one in the Inner Harbor that just happened, I think it was yesterday or the day before, where the two kids on the scooter murdered at least one. I think it was a boy and a young girl that was shot in the head as well. It was like a graze wound, but nonetheless, there's definitely an issue with the juvenile crime in Baltimore City. So I do think there is something to be said for the nuclear family structure. I mean, what is the rate of call it paternal absence or the lack of a nuclear family in Baltimore City? I mean, it's got to be 75, 80%, maybe higher. I mean, that's just not going to be a recipe for a flourishing society. And anyway, I do think that is an interesting change of tune, though, from Mayor Scott. Again, I think he's halfway there with the beginning part of his statement. I think what you'll typically see him do is just kind of, basically blame it on the collective. Like, this is a broader problem. It's a national trend. It's a systemic issue. It's going to take years and years and years. And we do this, that, and the other. So I'm frankly a little bit encouraged by the change of tune in the beginning part of the statement. As far as like specific and actionable policies, I know he says they're like kind of working with the state police. I would love to see the state police kind of, march into Baltimore City and really have a much, a larger presence there. I think C4 and Brian Neiman have quoted that Baltimore City's police officer, they've got a huge staffing problem. They're down like 50 or 60 officers for what they should have. So I think an infusion from state police could help. And I wouldn't even be against, honestly, bringing in the National Guard. And I know they don't have, arresting powers, if you will. But one of the things that you'll hear Commissioner Harrison say is that, our police are occupied. They're down the block. They've got to stand out by the strip clubs and kind of, make sure everybody gets home from the block okay. And they're kind of wasting their resources there or outside of the bar. So, in my view, I don't see what the problem would be in bringing in the National Guard for the summer when we know there's going to be a summer of violence, right? Like, murders per capita, murder rates are the highest they've ever been in Baltimore City, which is really, really saying something, especially when you consider the population loss. So I think bringing in the National Guard and potentially stationing them by the block and by the bars in Federal Hill so that the police can actually go do the real police work would be a policy that I think could measurably reduce violent crime. Now, politically, whether or not that'll actually happen, I think, it's obviously doubtful, but that would be something that if I could wave a magic wand, I would love to see happen.
Yeah, I totally agree. We certainly need some type of more order, law and order within 100%. The city. And a lot of the policies that we see, as I mentioned, his reimagining policing, and this type of this idea, maybe in the long term, but to me, it seems like right now we have a serious problem going on within the city that needs to be addressed. So as you mentioned, having the National Guard come in seems like it would really, really, really do something right away.
Sure. And I'm not the first to call for that, but I think of almost like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs type thing. Like, sure, we might be able to reimagine the police in 10 or 15 or 25 years when things are in a much better state. But for right now, I mean, you're going to have 100 people potentially murdered just this summer. I mean, that just, it can't happen. And if more boots on the ground will help to squash that, I think that's got to be something that's considered for the well-being of the city and the state.
Yeah.
And ultimately the people, the victims, I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I mean, they're the ones that suffer the most. And it's unfair to law-abiding citizens of Baltimore City. I mean, it's just, it's vicious. It's a vicious cycle.
Right. And you are from Maryland, is that right? You're here in Maryland, or okay?
Correct. Yeah, born and raised in Harford County. Went to school at Salisbury. Met a girl from Montgomery County at Salisbury. We now live in Carroll County. Used to work with my dad rehabbing homes in Baltimore City. So I've kind of gotten like the whole tour de Maryland. Yeah, definitely a blue blood Marylander for sure.
Yeah, you certainly are. And so how have you found, being a conservative? I mean, your family's conservative, you're conservative. How have you found growing up conservative in such a liberal state?
I don't really think I realized it too much until I came into the professional world, which kind of coincided too with this sort of like woke revolution that we're kind of still in the midst of here. I think most, thinkers would kind of point to like 2014, 2015, Michael Brown and Ferguson and Freddie Gray in Baltimore City as kind of being like these catalyzing events for this trajectory that we've been on since. And at that time, I was working for, a cybersecurity company and then an HR and staffing company, which are, very progressive companies by nature and also staffed full of people that have a progressive mentality. I've even been part of teams that have, helped to construct diversity and inclusion type reports and promote them. So I've really kind of been there like in the belly of the beast. And, I tried to do my best, and maybe this is like a man thing. I really tried to compartmentalize it, like just kind of like, leave the work the work. It's not something that's going to be for me to change right now. Just focus on doing my job. But it did get to a point where, especially with the George Floyd thing and like the insurrection on January 6th, it really became like, part of day-to-day conversations, even at work. And so I do think it became more and more untenable for me to work in that sort of environment, which is one of the reasons why I sought out working for the organization that I do now. I was a big fan of OutKick by Clay Travis. Not sure if you're familiar with it. But they had a job posting up one day for a growth marketing manager. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to apply and just see what happens. And I ended up getting the job. And that kind of got me into this, I'm kind of quasi in conservative media where I can be much more free to be myself because my employer obviously, isn't going to be judgmental to my point of view. And also, candidly, my income is now based out of not Maryland. So I'm kind of free to come and do something like this where I don't have to worry about, frankly, angering a client or saying something out of line. I can speak a little bit more freely. So I think it's definitely been challenging, but I think lately I've been relieved to be able to speak more freely.
Yeah. And what do you think about? I mean, because you're in your 20s, late 20s, right? And
31.
Oh, you said 31. Okay.
Over
and
the hill.
So, no, that's not over the
hill. Yeah, right.
But we see, or we at least believe to think that younger people, younger generation, are much more progressive. Where do you see that trajectory going as far as leaning this progressive leftism, wokeism? Where do you see that going within the next 5 or 10 years?
Sure. I think, there's that old adage that if you're not a liberal when you're 20, you have no heart. And if you're not a conservative by the time you're 40, you have no brain. I think there's definitely, part of that at play here where the younger generation is just always going to lean more left. But I think what's curious is that, there's always just been this idea that everyone accepted and was just kind of like obviously true that, the parents should shepherd the children and the senior leaders should kind of instruct the younger employees. And we're in this position now where it's almost as though, the expectation is that you're just going to affirm whatever the youngest person or the most progressive person in the room thinks. So I think instead of like kind of shepherding people into adulthood, we're kind of validating their desire to be called a Peter Pan, like someone that just kind of never grows up. And I think we're seeing that with, declining birth rates, declining rates of marriage. And that's not unique to Maryland. Obviously, that's a national trend. Where do I see it going? I would like to think, I was thinking about the movie Dune recently. I read the book a few years ago, saw the movie. I thought it was quite good.
You said Dune?
Dune, yeah. Frank Herbert's Dune. I don't know if you saw it, maybe not.
I saw it. It was really good with Zendaya and yeah.
Timothée Chalamet. Yeah, I loved it. But I think one of the interesting concepts in the movie that I think you might potentially see with Gen Z and even the next younger generation is a kind of wholesale rejection of technology. Like that was kind of the premise of Dune, right? Like they kind of over depended on thinking machines, and it resulted in disastrous consequences, kind of similar to the Matrix as well. And so in Dune, the society just basically rejected computers on the whole, and they kind of resolved back to more of like a medieval feudal type structure where there was basically no technology. It wasn't computers and iPhones. It was, quills and pens and tablets, like, stone tablets. And so I think maybe I'm being a little bit idealistic here, but I would like to think that there could be the potential that the next generation just kind of on the whole rejects technology and social media now that the damaging effects of it are so evident and so obvious.
I hope so, but I mean, I don't see where it's going that way. I mean, are you familiar with the World Economic Forum that they just had going on, and they're pushing? I read something where they were pushing where sound waves can somehow affect neurons in the brain. Then you have Elon Musk, who a lot on the conservative side have really praised for his advocacy of free speech, but he's a big proponent of the chips, chipping individuals and a lot of this stuff. I don't know. I mean, I really I hope we're going that way, but it seems like we're moving more and more. Even if you look at Facebook and the whole virtual reality situation with the avatars and things like that.
Yep.
I hope so, though. I hope it's what you're saying, but I think it just has to be a
Fingers
total
crossed.
mind change. Yeah, 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 exactly. And
No, but Governor Larry Hogan was there. He was at that World Economic Forum, as well as some business leaders in Maryland, as well as some cybersecurity business leaders. So it's definitely something that hits very close to home for us. Um, I do think it demonstrates kind of the fissure in the Republican Party too. There's kind of like this corporate Republican element, like the Republicans of say the '90s and the '80s, versus these kind of like emerging, call it Trumpy, call it cultural conservative type Republican, which is really more where I identify with. I'm certainly skeptical of any kind of global movement. I would, much prefer to see, and again, I think it comes down to like the family and the community being the building blocks of any flourishing society. I think you've got to focus not on, world economics, but in community economics, right? Like I'd rather see, instead of a global technology company being founded in Carroll County that brings in hundreds of millions of dollars, I'd rather see, a new hardware store owned by the fella down the street, or a new local newspaper that kind of disrupts the business model of local news and delivers, a new kind of local news that's kind of community oriented, even if it brings in less money. I don't think money is the important thing here. I think it's a sense of family and community. So call me maybe a cultural conservative and a localist. But that's sort of how I would respond to, Larry Hogan and the like in the World Economic Forum. I didn't keep up with that particular story as much as I potentially should have, but I was kind of peripherally aware, but definitely would find myself skeptical.
Yeah, I totally agree. But and then with the pandemic that's just happened, we have this idea of this global world policing, world and sharing of information and things like that. So it'll be pretty interesting to see where things go from now on that front. Now, I know you did write, I did see one of your pieces where you wrote about the mass, I think it was the mass hypnosis or
mass formation psychosis. Robert
mass
Malone.
formation psychosis, yes. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you think about that idea or the phenomenon of that?
Sure. I mean, I think it definitely comes down to a sort of, a mind virus, if you want to call it that, it's kind of sweeping through the country. I think in the absence of any real religion, I think you're seeing this kind of woke leftist, mentality kind of become the replacement or the surrogate religion that, again, is just kind of sweeping through the country. And that's kind of why, even as an atheist, I'm sympathetic and welcoming to Christian values, because I think they're what the country and all of Western society was founded on and has been proven to be the best kind of framework to have a good society. And B, it's certainly better than what we're seeing now. With regard to mass formation psychosis, that particular article was interesting because I've done a lot of work in search engine optimization. So like the process of just, getting your website as much visibility in Google search and Google News as possible. That's kind of my profession. And I've done some reporting on it. And what was curious about that particular article was that Google basically buried Robert Malone's content. So like he was the one that popularized the term mass formation psychosis. And if you think about the job of Google or any search engine, it's to satisfy the search. If someone's searching for a thing, give them the thing they're looking for. That's literally the function of a search engine. And so considering that Malone popularized the term and then Google buried his content on like the second or third or fourth page, just goes to show you that it's just another example of censorship and bias in our media properties.
Yeah, and it's bizarre. And as you mentioned, the very idea of the search and what Google was kind of touted to be is bring you right to where you want to be when you put in the search that you're looking for. And for them to bury him beneath all of that, and he coined the phrase. It's crazy, but again, it goes towards this censorship that we've seen through over and over again, especially throughout the pandemic, and a lot of things that they censored have come out to be true.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's uniquely frustrating. I mean, what's a conspiracy theory one day is true the next. It's just a matter of what day you say it, or who is the person saying it, and what their political point of view is. But yeah, definitely frustrating. I mean, I've been tracking the Google search thing for a while, just because again, that's kind of my profession, that's my background. And at one point, President Trump had tweeted how Google search results were biased, and I kind of like dove into it, did like an academic style study because I thought he was onto something, and he was right. But my view at the time, this is like 2017, was that there were just more left-leaning journalists. There were just more left-leaning content producers, which is why there was more left-leaning content. So kudos to you all for producing some right of center content. I think that's definitely needed for where we are. But no, it's definitely changed in the last couple of years here, where there is explicit censorship, and there are just a plethora of obvious examples, that just being one.
Yeah. And we are getting to the end of the show, but I want to ask you, what do you think is, how do you think we can bridge the gap between, this progressive media platform and media complex that we have here now, and try to get people to understand that we are all trying to get to the same place. We want this country, the city, our communities to thrive, but people just don't seem like they're moving farther apart than coming together on any of these issues. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think the most important thing is just having the bravery to speak out. And I don't think that means like, jeopardize your career or your income or what have you. Like, you got to get to a place where you can actually do it. But I think that, I don't know if you call it Matt Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman Yet? But I think like one of his main points, and I believe this is generally true of most of, call it the woke less positions, is that they kind of collapse under their own weight. So if conservatives or even just, independent average people are just speaking their mind and speaking freely, kind of like an Elon Musk, right, who's not really a Republican or a conservative, by any sense, but is speaking freely, I think what you'll see is that these terrible ideas that are coming, primarily from the left, there are some on the right as well, but I think they'll just kind of collapse under their own weight in time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the last question I have, I generally ask everyone that I talk with on the show, what is your number one concern for your community? And then what is the number one hope that you have?
The number one concern I would have for my community in Carroll County is that it starts to turn increasingly blue. I think you saw it in Frederick County. It's a very specific example, but I think you saw it in Frederick County. And I think, especially with this remote work kind of migration, or people not having to go into work every single day, I think you're going to see a lot of Howard County people moving out to Carroll County. Howard County, obviously much more blue than Carroll. So I think keeping Carroll County conservative is a primary and acute concern that I have, and one that I hope to work towards in the next, 10, 15, 20, 25 years.
All right. And I want to kind of go full circle, because we were talking about, at the top of the hour, the idea of you being a cisgendered white male. I want to play this clip for you and get your thoughts on this. All right.
Are there any marginalized communities you want to apologize to? I don't know, maybe the Patois community?
No. I don't feel like I've truly done anything offensive, so.
You don't see it as cultural appropriation. You see it as like a celebration of culture. And then it's like social justice warriors can like go kick rocks.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
No comment. Got it.
No, I mean, I 100% agree. Social justice warriors can kick rocks.
Yeah.
Oh, is that Tom Hanks' son? Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was Chet Hanks. That's okay. Chet Hanks. So I don't know if you know the background of that, but he's like a big, he's really into Caribbean culture. And he spent a lot of time in Jamaica. And so there was a situation where I think he was at an awards show and he started speaking patois. So with a Caribbean Jamaican vernacular, and people lost their minds behind it. And so it went viral, and a lot of people on the left, social justice warriors, as she mentioned, that was Z-Way's show on HB, I think Showtime. We're just like, he's cultural appropriation because he's speaking with this vernacular, and he was totally unapologetic about it. And basically, as you can see, he says social justice warriors can go kick rocks. And so I want to get your thoughts on that. Just, do you think more people need to have that attitude and that response when people are getting, trying to be canceled, trying to be called out for things like this? What are your thoughts there?
He definitely had a particularly dismissive tone, which I think obviously, works for television. But I do think it's important to stand your ground. And I would also say that, cultural appropriation, call it whatever you want, it's given us so many of the beautiful things that we have. Elvis appropriated jazz to create rock and roll. We have rap music from the 90s. You could just rattle off 100 different examples. So many of the good things that we have are the result of mixing cultures. That's how you get new ideas. So I think to say that like one individual can't appropriate another person or another group's thought, idea, vernacular, turn of phrase, whatever. I just wouldn't stand by that at all. I think that's what makes us beautiful.
All right. All right. So just wanted to bring it full circle. We are at the end of our time. So thank you so much for joining me tonight, Ethan. Any last thoughts, anything you would like to share with the audience for where people can find you or in some of your pieces that you've written? Anything you'd like to share there?
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. This has been great. I think the best place to follow the work that I'm doing now is at the Maryland Muckraker. Yeah, mdmuckraker.com. I've been blogging a lot about the Republican gubernatorial election and some local races here in Carroll County, and also some broader pieces. So that'd probably be the best place to start.
All right. Well, that wraps up this episode of the 8:30 show. We are all over social media under Metro Conservative Media. Like, share, and leave a comment, and follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, also Twitter. Check us out on our website at www.metroconservativemedia.com. We love to get your feedback. I hope to connect with you next Thursday at the same time. Wishing you warm days and starry nights. Good night.